We are ready to get started with Bible class. Come on in and find your place. We are happy to see you all this morning. Glenelle just mentioned to me she won't be here for a week or so. She's going to ride a dog down to Texas. Well, she said she's taking a Greyhound, something like that. All right. We are finishing up a handout this morning in 2 Samuel chapter 20. If you forgot your copy of that or didn't have one, we have a few left. If you need one, raise your hand. We are finishing that this morning. 2 Samuel chapter 20. It was almost hard to come inside today. So pretty out there. I'm curious, how many of you had your windows open last night? Only a couple. That just surprises me. It was so nice out, and it was a beautiful night, beautiful morning. You can go now, Joe. Joe wanted to know when he can go out to that new playground. I said, you just go on now. But that is a fun-looking playground. Somebody did something extremely good and nice. And I know the kids, it didn't take them long to find that, did it? And they're already enjoying that a lot. All right, we are going to bow for a word of prayer, and then we're going to get started with things. If you bow with me, please. Father in heaven, thank you for such a beautiful morning. It's so refreshing to have a little cooler air outside. We know we'll go back and forth. It's the design of this world, and you've made it, and you govern it. You control all things. And we bow before you humbly. We thank you for loving us so. And sometimes we wonder, like the psalmist did, about man and why you consider him the way that you do and treat us so kindly. We are grateful for the price you paid for our souls to be clean and be able to come back into your presence. Thankful for these gatherings, thankful for time to study the Bible, sharpen our minds and open our hearts, help us to learn and to grow all the days of our life, and to be a blessing wherever we can to every life that we touch. Thank you for preserving us to this day, for instilling within us through your holy word a desire to gather. Bless those who are still on their way, those who are striving to get back after illness, and those who are watching online, and it's their best contact to look in on things with this congregation. Thank you now, Father, for blessing our loved ones. We pray for so many. Our prayer list is extensive, and we all have family and friends that we're concerned for and pray for daily. We especially pray for Wanda St. John and her new living situation for a while. We pray you bless her body and health and help her recover from her illness. And for Max Ellis and a host of others, we pray your care and comfort for the Thompson family and the loss of Mary. What a lovely lady she was. And we're thankful, Father, that we have this great hope that you give to us. Thank you for telling us about heaven, making a way to get there. Bless us now as we open our Bibles together, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we're going to continue this study. We have just a few items to cover in 2 Samuel chapter 20. Here's some names. Joab and Abishai. What's their relationship? They are brothers. Now, if I say Amasa, now you have a cousin to those two brothers. Amasa was the commander over Absalom's army. When Absalom died, David made Amasa the commander of his army. That was an olive branch move. That was a desire to mend a chasm between those who had supported Absalom and those who had supported David. David's commander had been Joab, but man, he was a scoundrel, a schemer, and David didn't really trust him anyway. And so Joab, Abishai, Amasa, they're all nephews of David, and David allowed Amasa to become the commander of his army and demoted Joab. In the process of all of this coming back to Jerusalem, there's a fellow named Sheba. And he stirred up the controversy that was already there, created a bigger division, capitalized on that. We don't have anything to do with David. Everybody to your tents. And all of those northern tribes, the rest of the tribes, they all walked away from David as if they were following Sheba. David gives a command for Amasa to go gather everybody in Judah. We're going to go hunt him down. But Amasa delayed longer than he should have. Now David sends Abishai. Interesting, it wasn't Joab he said Abishai. You go run him down. You go run down Sheba. Amasa's waited too long. We can't wait on this. Joab and Abishai go together with the army and the special forces unit with them, and they go to hunt him. They don't get very far from Jerusalem, just about 6 miles. And lo and behold, they find Amasa. Joab kills him. And Joab is taking back the reins of the army without David say so. And now Joab, Abishai, and the army with them, they're tracking Sheba. And do you remember where they find him? Where do they find Sheba? A place named Abel. Abel Beth Maacah, meadow of the house of Maacah. And that's where they find him, and it is the northernmost point in the whole land. It's up there beyond the city of Dan. It's north of Lake Hula. It's way up there. And that's where they finally find him. He's holed up in that city behind its walls. And that is our text today. So let's start and pick up our reading in verse 16. Then a wise woman called from the city, "Here, here, please tell Joab, come here that I may speak with you." So he approached her, and the woman said, "Are you Joab?" He answered, "I am." Then she said to him, "Listen to the words of your maidservant." He answered, "I'm listening." She spoke, saying, "Formerly they used to say they will surely ask advice at Abel, at that city, and thus they ended the dispute. I'm of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You are seeking to destroy a city, even a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord?" Joab replied, far be it from me that I should swallow up or destroy. Such is not the case. But a man from the hill country of Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri, by name, has lifted up his hand against King David. Only hand him over, and I'll depart from the city. The woman said to Joab, "Behold, his head will be thrown to you over the wall." Then the woman wisely came to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they were dispersed from the city, each to his tent. Joab also returned to the king at Jerusalem. Well, that's a gruesome way to start your Sunday morning. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine doing it to someone. I can't imagine seeing that flying over the wall. I can't imagine picking it up and carrying it back to Jerusalem. The whole thing's just so awful. But that's what they did. I guess it was easier to throw the head than the body. So they identified him, and he's gone, and he's out of the picture. Now, tell me about the viewpoint of the city. Here they are in their northernmost point. Well, they haven't, seen this kind of of a situation for who knows how long. And all of a sudden, here's this whole army showing up at their doorstep. What's the viewpoint of the city? What are they thinking? Yeah, who did this? What's going on? What's all the ruckus? What's all the fuss? Why are they attacking us? They're beating our walls down. What is going on? They had no idea whatsoever what the attack was about. This is the other side of the story that's often overlooked when pursuing a problem. How does this look from the other side? It's one of the reasons that we're told in the New Testament, if you have something against your brother has something against you, go to him. You've got to open up a line of communication to remedy this thing. You've got to talk to each other. This is the reason we do that. Sometimes there is the viewpoint from over here, and judgment's made and settled. But over there, they don't even know what's going on. So you get together and you start hashing it out and talking with one another, and you're likely going to come to a solution that's more peaceful and maintaining of unity than the one-sided story. It's why we're supposed to talk to each other when there's problems like that. All right, anything else you want to say here? Jeremiah? Achan, who stole of the accursed things from Jericho. They lost the battle at Ai. What's going on? Got to figure it out. And the other illustration was Jonah, who talking about when he arrived at Nineveh on the ship, when there's this big storm and they're throwing stuff overboard and they don't know what's going on. Jonah knows what's going on. And so with a conversation, they get it figured out and a remedy is found. So one side of the story is never complete. And look, we all have friends, we all have family, we all have people who talk in our ear and we talk in theirs. And sometimes what we hear or what we say is one side of the story. And though we love each other and we want to believe each other, we always have to remember there's another side to every story. Find out the whole account or just stay out of it. And so that's a good lesson, I think, and we'll bring that up at the end again. Let's look forward, beginning at verse 23 through 26. This is just a little paragraph here about David back in Jerusalem setting up his government. And here's what we read. Now Joab was over the whole army of Israel. All right, you see how he took his place back? Amasa had it. He killed Amasa. David had sent Abishai to go run down Sheba. But Joab's the one in charge. Who's the woman want to talk to behind the wall? To Joab, not to Abishai. He usurped his place back. He just took it. And now all of a sudden you have Joab was over the whole army of Israel. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites. And Adoram was over the forced labor. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. And Sheva was scribe. And Zadok and Abiathar were priests. And Ira the Jerite was also a priest to David. So here's just some basics about David setting up his government. There's a similar list back in 2 Samuel chapter 8 and in 1 Chronicles 18. But time has passed, and there's been a few changes here and there, and so there's some mentions about changes and additions that are in this paragraph that we've just read. 3 noteworthy mentions. One is Joab, we've already talked about. He's back over the army, and he schemed that and did that. Then there's this one, Benaiah is in charge of a special forces group and eventually will be instructed to kill Joab later in time, and he takes Joab's place as the commander. But that's down the road. You have to get to 1 Kings chapter 2 to read about that. But sometimes we worry about that. Oh, that slipped under the sight of God. He didn't see it. God didn't see what Joab did. Somebody's getting away with something. Nobody gets away with anything. And so as time progresses, things work out, and justice and punishment are meted out the way they should be. Don't ever think that God doesn't see something. We worry about that in our own life. Never take your own revenge. Leave room for the vengeance of God. He's in charge. He sees everything. His justice will be done. Let God work out those details. We don't have to jump into God's seat on the throne and decide how to punish people. God's going to do that. Just follow God's lead with that and be patient. Now, the third one, and I need you to park this in your mind where you can grab it easily later. Do you still have a little room in there for something that you can tuck away and you can remember? I think just me introducing it this way, you're going to remember this. And when it comes up again in a reading, you're going to go, oh, that's what that's about. We are clued about something here very important. What was the job of Adoram? He's over the forced labor.
I have a different word.
Okay.
It says he was in charge of revenue.
In charge of revenue. This is a word for forced labor. And you think about David coming back to Jerusalem, and he has all these building projects in mind. Look what happens between the reign of David and Solomon. And by the way, this forced labor was continued into the reign of Solomon. So here's what I want us to park in our memory. This is significant. By the way, just to help out with the meaning of the word, this forced labor, that word is the same word that's used in the book of Exodus, chapter 1, verse 11, for the taskmasters in Egypt. So Adoram is over forced labor. David had building projects. Adoram's name is going to have some variations in spelling as you look in one text or another in the Old Testament. He will be called Adoram. He will be called Hadoram with an H in front. He is Adoniram in another text. So there are variations to the spelling of his name from one text to another. But he continues through the reign of David, into the reign of Solomon, into the reign of Rehoboam. This is the issue in the days of Rehoboam. This is the issue when the 10 northern tribes rebel. This is what they are complaining about. David starts it here. Then I want you to notice, let's go to 1 Kings chapter 9. 1 Kings chapter 9. And we will zero in on verse 15. No, I want 1 Kings. I'm in 2 Kings. That doesn't work. I was reading wrong names. 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 15. Now this is the account of the forced labor which Solomon levied to build the house of the Lord, his own house, the Millo. Some of you may have the word citadel or something like that there. The wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. And so that continues, and the building projects continue in the reign of Solomon. Samuel, way back in 1 Samuel chapter 8, had warned the Israelite nation. He warned them, this is going to be the procedure of the king. If you want a king to reign over you, if you want to be like the nations around you, this is the way it's going to be. And he talks about the forced labor from your sons and your daughters and the taxes you'll pay, the people will have run in front of him, in front of his chariot, and all this that it's going to cost you. He warned them about this, and here it is. And in the days of Rehoboam, they're going to begin complaining about it. Now you get to 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12, right in the first verse and following from there. Then Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Now when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, don't get those names mixed up. Rehoboam, son of Solomon, he's taking the throne. Jeroboam's a different individual. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it. He was living in Egypt, for he was yet in Egypt, where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon. Solomon was going to execute him. And he went to Egypt to hide out. Solomon dies. Rehoboam comes up to the throne to be made king at Shechem. And Jeroboam comes back, and he's got a following. Then they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke hard. Now therefore lighten the hard service. That is another word tied to the idea of forced labor. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. That's going to include forced labor. That's going to include taxation. Solomon had an expensive bill. Between the taxes he levied against the people and the forced labor that he put on them, and they're complaining about the hard service. And they want that relieved. The older men counseled Rehoboam to serve the people, to lighten the load, and they'd follow you forever. But Rehoboam listened to his younger peers, allowed them to counsel him, and they wanted to increase the burden and flex the authoritative muscle of government. And there was the rebellion under Jeroboam of the 10 northern tribes. All of this started with Adoram being over the forced labor. David setting up his government. And it just got more and more powerful and demanded more and more of the people until it came to a head in the days of Rehoboam. So if you'll tuck that away and remember where the starting place of that was, when you read about Solomon handing the reins over to Rehoboam in this episode happening, you'll remember where that started at and what it was all about, and it will be helpful for the future. Final comments here. We're down to some lesson points that we want to glean from our study in chapter 20, and then we'll move on to the next handout. Lesson point number 1 from Sheba. He was one of the opportunists in the chapter. There will always be people like that, taking advantage of some circumstance to advance themselves, stirring up dissension, and doing that rather than being part of the solution. There will always be an opportunist or more around. And so we need to be wary of that and be alert to it. Lesson point number 2, we go back to those 10 concubines who were left to watch over the house when David fled from Jerusalem and his son Absalom violated them. David comes back to Jerusalem and he shuts them up, and they live as widows for the rest of their lives. Life doesn't always seem fair. And there are times when the sins of others have a negative impact in our own lives. But when we keep in mind the bigger picture, God's overall control, His judgment, His justice, how God's going to handle things in the bigger picture of things, You see that justice at work while the moment may be difficult for us. Trust in God who is over all and sees all things and brings justice to be. Lesson point number 3, 4, and 5 all have to do with King David. King David was encouraging Judah, his home tribe, to take the lead in bringing him back across the Jordan to the neglect of the other tribes. They were all talking about it, but David needed action taken. He went to the tribe of Judah and said, "We're brethren, you need to be the spearhead of this and bring me back across the Jordan." When he did that, that may have put a little fuel on the fire of the dissension that was in those tribes already, because the others felt slighted. So every decision we make should be considered in its long-term outcome, not just the immediate need of the day. Think about where that's going to go in the future. Is that going to be helpful or harmful? Look at the picture down the road before you make a decision and do something. David, again, another lesson for us, that forced labor that went too far into the next generation, and the next generation became a catalyst for the division of the northern and the southern kingdom. Not all human plans prove to be helpful or expedient in God's will. Even those that are permissible are not always wise. And we need to be careful that we're not pushing something too far, even though it may be permissible, to where it becomes divisive. Another lesson from David is his urgency in putting down Sheba's revolt. He told Amasa, "You go around Judah, you gather all the fighting men, you be here at the third day. We can't wait for him to get fortified and organized. We got to chase him down now, and we got to stop this rebellion." And there is a lesson about stopping problems in their earliest stages before they take root and grow and become something much bigger. Got a problem? Got a mistake that needs to be corrected? Nip it in the bud. Start right now. Get it done, get it taken care of before it grows into something much larger. That's the way to do that. Then we come to a lesson about the wise woman in the city of Abel Beth-Maacah, and she reminds us, open up the dialogue when trouble comes and seek ways of peace. Talk to each other in a sincere effort to work things out and find a solution to the problem. Final lesson point that we'll make with this chapter is that peace is a fragile thing. That's true in the home, and it's true in a congregation, it's true in a community, and true in nations. Peace is a fragile thing. It requires constant work, constant effort. Ephesians chapter 4, "Therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." We as members of God's church are to work at that diligently. And don't form judgments and opinions that are divisive, but rather come together and talk as brethren and maintain that spirit of unity and peace. Any final comments that you have? All right, I need some help. We've got a brand new handout. A couple of guys would do well for this. Good. Thank you. Thank you. We are entering into chapter 21. This one is titled Famine and Philistines. You're going to notice when you get your handout, there's a diagram on that front page. And that sort of outlines for you the remainder of 2 Samuel. And we'll talk about that momentarily. That's an interesting little diagram. That is not original with me. I don't think that hard. but I can read and study and find some reference tools, and that's where I found this and sort of recreated it and adapted it for our use here in Bible class. The final chapters, chapters 21 through 24, are going to capture a snapshot of 1st and 2nd Samuel in these final chapters, especially David's career. Please remember that our events are not chronological necessarily. Sometimes they are, but not always. And we're going to find that to be the case here. So don't think that this is happening this year and that next year and then that's the following year. Don't think of them in chronological order because that's not the way they're being presented. What we have in chapters 21 through 24. Anybody else need a copy of that? Did we get everybody? Great. What we have here in these final chapters is a literary pattern. There's a name for it that I'd never heard of until reading through this and studying through it and reading some material. This is a chiasm. And the literary pattern that's here is to say a thing and then say it again in reverse order. Not the same identical thing, but something similar to it, but not identical. So you have this literary pattern where you're going to have this, this, and this, and then in reverse order, it's going to say it again and again and again, and it sort of makes a U. And you think about the way this is written, and it's there in that diagram for you. In chapter 21, the first part of chapter 21, there's a famine. And it's about divine punishment. There's a famine in the land. Something has gone wrong, and there's a famine from God. Then you have David's servants. They're going to be killing 4 Philistine giants. And then in chapter 22, you have this song of David, a song of praising God. God's delivered him from all of his enemies. Now let's go in reverse order. You go to chapter 23, David's last words praising God. Then you go to chapter 23, the second part of that chapter, David's mighty men kill enemies. And then you end up in chapter 24 with the pestilence again as divine punishment. So you have something stated, point 1, 2, 3. Think of these as paragraphs, 6 paragraphs. 1, 2, 3, reverse order, something similar in kind. 1, 2, 3, the other direction. And that's the way these are written. Now, once you see that, you can't unsee it. And it will just help you move through the material. And you say, well, why is it written this way? Why is it written out of chronological order in some of these things? It's following a pattern of writing. It's sort of like a poetry. And so it's written a certain way. We are in this particular handout going to be studying through the first 2 paragraphs in chapter 21. And those have to do with the famine and David's servants killing the Philistine giants. So in chapter 21, there's a 3-year famine. That takes you through 14 verses. Then the 4 Philistine battles and the 4 giants that are killed, verses 15 through 22. And then we'll close it with some lesson points the way we did the previous lesson. Let's begin taking a look at the first 6 verses. Ready? Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, consecutive years. And David sought the presence of the Lord, and the Lord said, "It is for Saul and his bloody house, because he put the Gibeonites to death." So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the sons of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. And the sons of Israel made a covenant with them. But Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the sons of Israel and Judah. All right, remember where you're at in the days of David. You're way toward the end of his life. We're at the end of 2 Samuel. But we're drawing back to something that happened way back in the days of Saul. And so when David first came on the throne, he had to address that. So you have your chronology that's spanning an enormous gap here from when Saul was removed from the throne through death, David takes up the throne, and there's an issue with the Gibeonites. And David has to deal with it. But we're reading about it toward the end of 2 Samuel. So just kind of keep all of your timing in mind with this. Verse 3, thus David said to the Gibeonites, what should I do for you, and how can I make atonement that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord? Then the Gibeonites said to him, we have no concern of silver. If you have the New American Standard Update the way that I do, you'll notice no concern of is in italics. That's supplied by the translators. They had to put some words in there to try to help smooth out the translation. Anybody else have a different translation right there in verse 4? We have no concern of silver or gold. Anybody have something different? We have no right to demand. So we have no right or we have no concern. Not the biggest issue here, and we don't have the authority and power to make it happen. That's not the position they hold in Canaan land anymore. Yep. It is not a matter. That's not what the issue is. That's not what the matter is. So you start piecing together all these different translations, and you begin to round out a picture of what they're saying. So we have no concern of silver or gold with Saul or his house, nor is it for us to put any man to death in Israel. We don't carry that kind of clout. And he said, I will do for you whatever you say. So they said to the king, the man who consumed us, who was that? Saul. The man who consumed us and who planned to exterminate us from remaining within any border of Israel, let 7 men from his sons. Sons here means descendants. Remember, Saul doesn't have many sons, right? Because some died on Mount Gilboa, some died afterward. So he doesn't have literal sons here, but he has descendants. Let 7 men from his sons be given to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, the chosen of the Lord. And the king said, I will give them. By the way, Gibeah of Saul, if you go back to 1 Samuel 10:26, that's where he hailed from. That's where Saul was from. We want to hang their corpses in Gibeah of Saul. Who tried to exterminate them from the land? Saul. Where do they want to hang the bodies? Gibeah of Saul. Now these are Gibeonites. Don't get the two confused. They are not the identical geographic location. They're about 3 miles apart. You have Gibeon and you have Gibeah. And they're very close in proximity. They're in Benjamin, but they're about 3 miles apart. All right, let's start unpacking some of this. There was a broken treaty. When was the treaty made? And how was it made? Okay, let me repeat for those of you at home, because those who are watching want to say, okay, what was that about? All right, here it is. Jeremiah remembers in Joshua chapter 9, when the Israelites had crossed the Jordan River, they attacked Jericho and they attacked Ai, and they're on the move, and the Gibeonites hear about this swarm of Israelites coming, what they've done on their way to Canaan land, what they've done on the other side of the river, what they've done to Ai and Jericho, and they say, man, we need to do something. We got to save our lives. The Israelites have been told, you wipe them all out. You kill all these people in Canaan. They had 400 years. That's what God told Abraham. The sins of the Amorites are not full. They have 400 years. Abraham, your descendants are going to be going to Egypt, being there for so long, then coming to Canaan land after that, and then the sin of the Amorites full. God gave them grace. He gave them time to get their act together, to turn around and worship the true and living God. They didn't do it. This was God's divine punishment on those who lived in Canaan land. Now it was just for the Israelites to come in, cross the river, and take that land and kill off those people in the judgment and justice of God. So here they come, and the Gibeonites hear about this. And while others around them are amassing forces to fight the Israelites, the Gibeonites come and they say, let's make a plan. And their plan, if you'll go back to Joshua chapter 9, what Jeremiah had paraphrased for us, we'll read a little bit of. Joshua chapter 9, beginning in verse 3, when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they also acted craftily and set out as envoys and took worn-out sacks on their donkeys, wineskins worn out and torn and mended, and worn-out patched sandals on their feet, and worn-out clothes on themselves, and all the bread of their provision was dry and had become crumbled. And they went to Joshua to the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, we've come from a far country. Now therefore make a covenant with us. Oh, we've come from so far. We just bought these shoes. Shoes are us. They were brand new when we started out. Now look at them, all worn out. This was fresh baked bread, but look at it now. Not even fit to eat. Look at our wine skins. They're all mended. They've torn over time. And you know how long it takes for that to happen. And so we're from far away. And so the Israelites made a mistake. Verse 14. So the men of Israel took some of their provisions and did not ask the counsel of the Lord. Joshua made peace with them, made a covenant with them to let them live, and the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. It came about at the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with them, they heard they were neighbors and that they were living in their land. God told them, you exterminate these people. Instead, they made a covenant. Why? Because they did not ask the counsel of God. When Saul gets on the throne, he breaks the covenant and sets out to exterminate them. That's what all of this is about. All right, you'll do some more reading about that and bring your papers back next week, and we'll continue this study. We are dismissed from class. Thank you.